The Joe Rogan Experience.
Are you, Jeremy, I'm sure you're aware of this, the footage from the Mexican Air Force?
Yeah, very aware of that.
What do you think about that?
Well, again, it's IR footage, which is really interesting. They actually got the cameras for drug runners, right? So you can see in the infrared, so it's beyond the observable, eye. I myself have not detailed looked at the footage. However, FLIR experts, some people that work with NSA have looked at it for me, and these are not lights in the distance. These are craft, very similar to what Commander Fravor talks about, without plumes, without heat signatures, non-traditional field propulsion systems. We don't have that. And
I thought they tried to, is this it right here? Is this the Mexican Air Force footage?
Yeah. So they tried to say these were lights on like an oil rig out in the water. That's been debunked.
Yeah, they tried to say it was a fire in an oil rig, right?
No.
The 2004
to the
Comcast
pilots.
Video of the Year was the Mexican Air Force tracking like 6. So literally right after our incident, we come back, and I think we were getting ready to go to Fallon, and I had Comcast, and the home page comes up, and there's this video, and I go, holy cow, that looks like what we chased. And it was like 6 of these things, and they were tracking them in the same area too, right off the coast of Ensenada.
And it's not as rare. There's now admitted an increased frequency. A Pentagon spokeswoman finally went off script. I was tracking the scripts for the last 2 years of what Pentagon spokespeople say about Commander Fravor's experience. Someone went off script last week in the New York Times, and she admitted there's an increased frequency of near misses because of these AAVs, anomalous aerospace vehicles. So it's pretty astounding. We're getting all these kind of revelatory moments in these little seeds that these are not ours. We don't have this. Even Elon doesn't have this. I mean, this is a propulsion system unlike anything we have. It's amazing. It's gravity propelled.
Now, that gimbal footage, when it said that there's a fleet of them, how far away are those guys where you don't see the individual objects, you only see a singular spot?
Well, the pod is, when you get pretty narrow, it'd be like, if I put 3 people around you, I can look at you and not see the other people. So that's what the pod is doing. But the radar is seeing everything because it has an AESA radar in it, which is an active electronically scanned array. So instead of like the radars we had, which did the mechanical, doing this, like old school, this thing is just a panel that sits in the front of the airplane, and through beam sharing or beam shaping, it can move and it can look all over. So we used to have what was called track while scan, so we would be able to track a target while we're still scanning. This thing has scan while it scans while it tracks. So it literally, if it sees you, if the radar sees you, it has basically a weapons quality solution. And it can do that on multiple targets. That's the same way the spy radar, the Aegis system works on the cruisers. It can track multiple targets and have weapons quality on all these different targets while it's still scanning a volume.
So in that image, you're seeing one individual object, but there's other objects?
Yes. The radar is seeing the object that the pod is looking at where they're talking. And when you hear the video, you hear the pilot say, dude, look at the SA page. There's a whole fleet of them. So what they're seeing is the pod is looking at the main. That's the bigger object at the gimbal, the thing that's rotating on the screen. And there's 5 smaller things in front. So this thing's just sitting there, and then he said they turn around on the radar and start going the other way while the pod's looking at this guy just kind of rotating.
So like a mothership and smaller aircraft.
Could be.
Something along those lines. Is there video of those smaller aircrafts or just the video of the one large one?
The only thing they have is the targeting pod. I would highly doubt, even if they had the video, that they're going to release the radar video because of classification levels.
Are you able to tell the story you told me about what was underwater with your other buddy? Because is that okay?
Yeah. So it's amazing. People come out of the woodwork when they figure out you've had this, because now they don't feel alone. So I was working. I still do it, but I was doing oil and gas at the time on a contract, and one of the guys, the story came out, and he was a Navy helicopter pilot. And he comes in, he goes, dude, hey, can I talk to you, man? I go, what about? He goes, dude, I got to talk to you. And I said, what do you want to talk to me about? He says, dude, you know your UFO? He said, yeah. He goes, I had a similar experience. I said, what's that? He said, he was flying CH-53s, which is a big lift, heavy lift that the Marine Corps uses, and the Navy uses it for certain things. And when they go for the East Coast, they do a lot of shooting off of, at the time, it was off of Puerto Rico. We had Roosevelt Roads that they ended up closing. But he was flying out of there. And, you got super clear Caribbean water. And they have these things that are called BQMs. They fly around, and then when they're all done, because they'll fly towards the ships, and the ship can, they can track with the radar And then they also do when the ships or submarines shoot torpedoes, they're called telemetry rounds. So they gather all the data on what the torpedo is doing underwater, and then they blow ballast, and this thing will come to the surface and float, and then they go pick them up, and then they can extract all the data out of them. So they do it for both. So he said the first time they're out and they're going to pick up this BQM. And those things, when they're flying, they're done. A parachute comes out and they hook it up. The helo drops the swimmer in the water. He goes and hooks this whole thing up, and then they hoist the whole thing up and fly back, and then they extract the data. So he says he's sitting in the front. In helicopters, there's, CH-53, you can actually see down by your feet, just like typical, like you got a Hawaiian ride, because you can see when you're touching down. So you got really good visibility out of those things, and you can stick your head out the window, too, because you're just kind of hanging out. He says he's going on there, and they're getting this thing hooked up, and as he's looking down, because they're, 50 feet above the water, he sees kind of this dark mass coming up from the depths. And they start to hoist the diver up, and they've got the BQM, and as they hoist it up, he says, and he's looking at this thing going, what the hell is that? And then it just goes back down underwater. It just once they pull the kid and the BQM out of the water, this object descends back into the depths. So he thinks, well, that was pretty weird. So he goes out, he says, not too long later, a few months later, he's out and he's picking up a torpedo. So he says they hook the diver up on the winch and they're lowering him in, and as he's looking down, he sees this big, massive, he goes, it's not a submarine. He's seen submarines before. Once you see a submarine, you can't confuse it with something else. This big object, kind of circular, he says, is coming up from the depths, and he starts screaming through the intercom system to tell him to pull the diver up, and the diver's like a few feet from the water. So they reverse the winch, and the diver's thinking, what the hell's going on? And he's getting pulled up, and all of a sudden, he said the torpedo just got sucked down underwater, and the object just descended back down into the depths, and they never recovered the torpedo.
Jesus.
And this happened in the late 90s. Mid to late 90s, I think it is. I could probably get in touch with him and ask him. And he told me this story, and I'm like,
how do you report that?
You come in and go, well, where'd the torpedo go? It just got sucked down. It just went down, and then you get the people that attribute it as, something happened when it blew ballast and it just took on water and sank. And he's like, it didn't sink. He goes, it literally looked like it got sucked down. The only reason they talked to him when they did the New York Times stuff, they talked to him, but because the incident was from the 90s, they wanted something, newer. So they did not include it, but I know they talked to him about it.
Now, what was the other footage that we were looking at? There was the first footage that Jamie pulled up that wasn't the gimbal footage.
Mm-hmm.
That was
the Go Fast.
The Go Fast. What is that?
That's it actually looks more like a Tic-Tac, but they saw it going across the water, and they're just grabbing a lock. So they're seeing this with their eyes, and he gets the FLIR to lock on it, and that's when you hear the kid go, "Oh, I got it," because he gets the auto track, and it's just something screaming across the surface of the water. So.
And this is in the same area?
This is East Coast, yeah. This is the same time frame as the gimbal video.
So the idea that these are birds, or the idea that this is a radar glitch, or somebody said pilot error, like on a clear blue day, Commander Fravor has nerves. I mean, that kind of thing that people have said on your show to you, that, these are explanations that make sense.
Who said that?
I don't want to say their names.
Mick West?
Yeah, sure.
Mick believes everything. Like every single thing that's ever happened has a rational explanation for it.
so the probability that all the radars went off at the wrong time. Commander Fravor had nerves. That all the other pilots up there with him, that this thing shot off like a gun instantly. Like that was somehow perfectly coordinated. That's a conspiracy. That's a fabrication. Probably Occam's razors. The events happened exactly like we're being told.
Yeah, for us it was. And I'll go back to the beginning of the story of, the other pilot who was brand new. She had been in the squadron for 4 months, 5 months. So she's pretty junior. She was still working on her initial qual on the airplane. And, so she gets we get the real world vector, and it's like, okay, real world vector, cool. I'm going to get to do something real, exciting. Then you see the water, and you think, oh, something's sinking, because it's kind of that shape of an airplane, that cross type. So now it's, oh crap, now it's search and rescue. We got to go down and see, because there's people, and we are sympathetic. And to the Tic-Tac, and as soon as the Tic-Tac, it's like, holy shit, what is that? And when you get, some people get very emotional when you talk about it. Because for me, it was like, for her, when you talk to her, she has a disdain for some of the leadership that didn't tell us that these things were out there. They're here now, we're getting vectored because we were the first time the manned airplanes had been airborne when one of these things showed up. that no one even gave us a brief that, hey, we're seeing these objects out here for the last 2 weeks. They're just kind of, you might want to know they're out there. And they never told us. No one knew these things existed besides the radar operators. And the radar operators didn't know what they were. They just knew they were seeing blips. So there's a lot of stuff that, that it flew around and it came around me, and it didn't do any of that stuff. It's the story that I gave you is just relatively benign. But it was, it's an interesting experience.
So these incidents that they reported were taking place before you saw that Tic-Tac encounter.
Yeah,
they were taking place over a period of how many weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
We went out at the beginning of the month for this 2-week at sea period. We pulled in for Thanksgiving, but other than that, we were out till I think December 21st is when we pulled the ship back in. Besides pulling in for the 3 days at Thanksgiving. So, yeah, for the 2 weeks prior, so this was on the 14th, and we went out at the beginning of the month. So about 2 weeks, they'd been watching these things come down, go up, come down, go up. But it was always when we were not flying, which is really probably like the midnight time frame until early in the morning the next, till noon the next day. And then we just happened to go. And if you think about it, I laugh at, if there was some little green man flying around in that Tic-Tac, he probably got back to the mothership and got yelled at for being seen. But you're like, oh my God, you let them see you. So